I would like to preach from the subject guidelines for a constructive church. Over the last several weeks now, we've been reading a good deal in our newspapers about guidelines. Now, this word has been applied basically to the public school systems across our nation, particularly in the South. The Supreme Court of our nation rendered a decision back in 1954 declaring segregation in the public schools unconstitutional. And that next year, in 1955, it came back stating that every school district was to integrate with all deliberate speed. And yet we came into 1966 with a terrible realization that only 5.2% of the Negro students of the South had been placed in integrated schools, which meant in substance that we had made 1% progress a year. And if it continued at that pace, it would take another 96 years to integrate the public schools of the South. And so the Department of Education decided that the process had to be speeded up on the basis of the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. And this department decided to set forth certain basic guidelines that had to be followed. The guidelines stated in substance that the process of integration had to be speeded up, that all grades had to be integrated, that even faculties had to be integrated. And this plan, these guidelines were submitted to every school district. And that school district had to decide whether it would follow the guidelines. If it refused to follow the guidelines, then federal funds would be cut off. If it complied with the guidelines, then federal funds would be continued. And so today, that is a great discussion all over the educational world in the public school system about whether a school district or school board will follow the guidelines.
What's up, Harley Typical Podcast family? We are back from our mid-season break. If you're paying attention, we dropped on our Facebook page that we were actually taking a mid-season break. And so we are back. Dr. Lee, Terisha, how was your break?
Listen, it was nice. It was nice to just decompress and unplug from everything for a bit.
Good. So how'd everything go with the 5 trees and the elves and all that stuff?
You know, I got so much slack. One thing we are certain of is people are listening. I'm so glad that people are listening.
So you got some comments about the trees, I guess.
Oh my goodness. The little passive comments about all those trees you guys have over there. I was like, my God. But it worked out. It worked out. We spread out the presents, the gifts under the tree. We made everyone take their time and really just enjoyed the day. It was a good holiday.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, we had a pretty good one too. My, for the listeners, I'm sure, maybe I haven't mentioned, my wife is from Malawi in Africa. And so her brother and his wife and their 3-year-old daughter, my 3-year-old niece, they came to visit. And so I hadn't seen my brother-in-law in a long time, I think since 2012.
Oh, wow.
My wife has been back and forth to Malawi, but I haven't been with her since 2012. So it was nice to see him and our 3-year-old niece that I had never met, named Lily Rose.
Oh, beautiful.
She is the sweetest little thing, but she also has a little mean streak. Apparently, her and my wife got into a fight in, I think, Target or one of those stores. They would just so.
She didn't get what she wanted.
No, she didn't. But she apologized. That's so sweet about her. Like she'll say, "I'm sorry, Auntie Issa."
Oh.
So, yeah, it was good. It was. I have to say though, it was a nightmare trying to get them back home.
Really?
Because that cold front came through with the snow.
Yeah.
And in Atlanta, we get ice, lots of ice. So it's not really the snow that we're concerned about. If listeners remember, a little bit over 10 years ago, I didn't realize it was 10 years ago, but in 2014, there was a big scandal in the Atlanta area called Snowmageddon, where people were locked on the freeway for days because they told everyone in Atlanta, there's an ice storm coming. Everyone go home and pick up your kids. And so 3 million people try to leave the city and go to the metro areas at the same time.
Yikes.
Yeah, people got stuck. So, our governors and city officials have been a lot better since then about being preemptive. But it was a nightmare trying to get them out because, things were shut down at the airport. Unfortunately, they actually had to spend the night at the airport. And little Lily Rose had to sleep on the floor, bless her heart. But we finally got them home. It took them about 2-3 days to get home because they were stuck in Addis for a day because they missed their connecting flight. But luckily, they were put up in a hotel by the airline. And so they ended up getting home, but it was a thing. It was really a thing. And we didn't sleep. My wife didn't sleep because, we kind of actually got out on the road to drop them off at the airport when they told everybody don't get on the road, but we had to get to the airport only for them to be stuck anyway.
Oh no.
So we couldn't go back and get them because everything froze over again the next day. And so it was just a thing. It was a whole thing, but
no.
Yeah. So, but they're home and they're safe and we had a good time otherwise. So
yeah. I think half of the rest was just not having to make that school commute. No pickup lines, no drop-off lines. I think that was half the rest. We had a great time. The lead three and I had a great time.
Awesome.
So, just staying in the house. That's half the fun.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's kind of the good part of this snowstorm. Oh, it's like, now I don't have to be obligated to take people around town and show them things.
There you go.
Because technically we're not supposed to be going anywhere. So
yeah, I showed the lead three pictures of friends and family that were in the snowed in areas. And they were so jealous. Oh, mommy, can we go visit? Can we go to their house?
Oh, so y'all didn't get any snow at all?
No. So I'm in South Florida. So our winter consists of 40, 50 degree mornings and 60, 70 degree afternoons.
Oh.
Yeah. So
how terrible.
I know. And then it goes right back up to 80. So it doesn't last long.
How terrible. I feel so
it's
bad.
Rough. We got to pull out our sweaters. We got to pull out our jackets. It's
you probably have to take the Crocs and flip-flops off when it hits 50.
No beach days.
Oh, terrible. Suffering for Jesus down there in Florida.
But we will suffer on in the name of Jesus. We are soldiers in the army.
Yes, apparently you are. Because y'all have it so good. We were frozen down here. Frozen. Actually, up here, we're a little bit further north than you are. So it was a thing. But we're glad to be back, listeners. Thank you for hanging with us during our mid-season break. Actually, this particular episode that we're recording is going to drop on January 20th, which is a special day for us, not just at the Harley Typical Podcast, but for our nation. And that is, the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a celebration of his birthday. Now, I don't know about you, but I love what has been dubbed the I Have a Dream speech. But, as a pastor and a preacher, I love good preaching. And so I've actually read and, where there's audio and maybe in some cases video, listened to a lot of Dr. King's sermons, not just his speeches, because, we forget Dr. King was a civil rights leader, but he was also a Baptist preacher.
He
And
was.
so,
Indeed.
yeah, he's had some great sermons. One of my favorites, as we sort of start off this episode, one of my favorites of his, and I don't know if it's a well-known sermon, but you can actually Google, and there's actually a book that contains transcripts of a lot of his sermons, and there's commentary at the beginning of it from a lot of contemporary preachers. It's an older book. I think it's called A Knock at Midnight. It's a book that I've read, so you can Google that.
Okay.
But one of my favorite sermons that he preached, and I'll just have to say it's one of my favorites because he mentions the date of June 5th, which is actually my birthday.
Huh.
So maybe that's why.
Prophetic.
Maybe that's why it's one of my favorites. But it's called Guidelines for a Constructive Church. And in it, he's really talking about what a church should be and what a church should do.
Mm-hmm.
But he makes some mention of some things that were going on in their time regarding the desegregation of schools. I want to just read a little bit of the transcript, if you don't mind, as we celebrate his birthday. And so here's a portion of what he said in that sermon that's always struck me. He said, over the last several weeks now, we've been reading a good deal in our newspapers about guidelines. Now, this word has been applied basically to the public school systems across our nation, particularly in the South. The Supreme Court of our nation rendered a decision back in 1954 declaring segregation in public schools unconstitutional. And that year, in the next year, in 1955, it came back stating that every school district was to integrate with all deliberate speed, in quotes. And yet we came into 1966, this is the year that he's preaching this sermon, 1966, with the terrible realization that only 5.2% of the Negro students of the South have been placed in integrated schools, which meant in substance that we haven't made 1% progress a year.
Wow.
And if it continued at that pace, it would take another 96 years to integrate the public schools of the South. And that was part of his sermon.
Wow.
And he later goes on to talk about what it means to be a church and how we're supposed to respond to things like that. But that always struck me, one, because he talks about June 5th later on, and it was my birthday. And so when he talks about June 5th, 1966, it was 12 years after the Supreme Court rendered segregation unconstitutional. And then 12 years later, he's preaching a sermon about it in 1966. But then 12 years later to the date, in 1978, I was born. So it's always like a special connection for me with that sermon. And he's, obviously concerned about the progress that is being made in being able to educate African-American and other minority students by desegregating schools. And so, I just want to just pause and acknowledge the sacrifice and the brilliance of Dr. King, and
absolutely,
not just as a civil rights leader, but as a preacher of the gospel. And he often said that, his prompting and his pushing was because of his commitment to his faith. And so, Terisha, this is also not just Dr. King's birthday as we drop this episode. It's also Inauguration Day. And
it is.
Yeah. And so, obviously there are a lot of people who are celebrating the incoming administration. But there are some who are a little bit nervous because of some of the discussions about what the administration may be planning to do. Particularly, there are people in our community, in the disability community, who are, like Dr. King, a little bit concerned about some of the talks of eliminating the Department of Education. And so, like Dr. King, we have some people in our community who are a little bit concerned about the progress of education and what may feel like, at least from some people that I've talked to, a regression in some senses about the state of education, should the administration successfully pull off some of the things that they are at least talking about doing. So I think we should talk about it. I think, hey, let's make this episode about that. And I think we should probably start. I don't know how you feel, especially for some of our listeners who maybe have not encountered or have not had to navigate the special education in our educational systems, or, all these talks about the DOE and all these other things and acronyms that we get sometimes when we talk about special education. So what do you think? I think we should probably just start at the beginning and talk about what some of those terms mean, what some of those things that happen within the school system that are beneficial to some of our children. So let's dive in. Where would you say we should start, man? If we're talking to someone who is maybe has a novice level understanding of, what happens in the education system when we're trying to accommodate our students with disabilities, where would you start in trying to educate them?
Well, let me definitely give my hats off to Dr. King on his birthday as well. Awesome bivocational pastor.
Yes.
So I admire the fact that he not only stayed in one area, but he also expressed concerns for social, economics, as well as education. So that's that passage you read, that portion you read, that spoke to a great man who had a concern and a heart for the community. So
absolutely.
Going back to education, going back to that, I would definitely say that just starting with the basics of special education. I'm using that term because that is the term that is still used within the Department of Education.
Right.
So we're gonna stick with those. But we all know, our audience alike, and maybe some of you don't, that there's a robust labeling for the community, and it goes with comfort. It goes with preference. So, but for this conversation, we're going to call it special education. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we talk about special education, that primarily that's housed within the Department of Education, and that primarily makes up IEPs, 504s, and any specific needs that the special education teachers need. That's where that's housed. That's where that's regulated. That's where they get their guidelines from the Department of Education. So you want to start in the beginning? Let's start with acronyms.
Okay.
I remember those being the first thing that I was like, wait.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing. Am I supposed to know what this means?
Exactly. Yeah.
Is this a word or an acronym? I don't even know, because we're just using them so just fluidly. So sometimes we can get so comfortable in the community, we don't realize that everybody is not aware of an IEP, a 504 plan, accommodations. I've even heard people mentioning STEM, and people say STEM. STEM as opposed to stemming.
Right.
And those can be, it depends on your context.
It does. Yeah. And those could be hurdles too for people who, are newly diagnosed or family members who are trying to, help. And so, I think that's a good place to start, because we want everybody in our listening audience to be able to kind of travel along this conversation with us. So, yeah. Yeah,
definitely. So let's go ahead and say the rule of thumb is, let's not assume people know the acronyms. Let's not assume people know. Right. So we'll just break it down. An IEP. IEP is an acronym for Individualized Education Plan.
Okay.
So that provides a tailored special education service or services to meet the unique needs of students with disabilities.
Okay.
So this can include goals, this can include accommodations, this can include modifications and related services. An example of that is an IEP can include the need for speech therapy. Another thing is a modification an IEP can include is this child can take a test standing instead of sitting.
Okay.
An accommodation could be this child gets an extra 20 minutes for testing. So things like that. That's what's included within an IEP.
Okay.
They may get extra bathroom breaks, things like that to accommodate their unique needs.
Right. So we're talking about accommodation. We're basically saying that these documents, trying to maybe help people understand accommodation. These documents outline ways in which the child has a unique need that, and I'm assuming that this document means that the teachers are required to provide those accommodations, those things that make it a little bit easier and give that child access to the same level of instruction and education by providing them with those. Sometimes it seems like small things, but I think they can be really big things for a child that has a disability. Yeah. So that's good to know. That's good to know.
So this is to enhance their educational experience, and this is mandated.
Okay.
Mandated. So it's a legally binding document that has to be followed. You can't just say, well, we're not following the IEP.
Okay.
That's illegal.
Okay.
So this covers anything that a student that is qualified with a disability needs, and how it impacts their learning.
Okay.
So this should enhance their experience.
That's good. Good to know.
Now let's move on to a 504. What's a 504? A 504 is to ensure students with disabilities have equal access to education through accommodations. Now that is, again, extended test time. That can be preferential seating. I don't work as well in the back as I may in the front, or I don't work as well in the front as I may in the back. But that is the 504 is the actual section of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973.
Okay.
So that's what the 504 stands for. It's the section that you'll find this accommodation in.
Yeah.
So this is also, it doesn't provide specialized instruction like an IEP. An IEP accommodates you for what you need specifically. This focuses more on removing barriers in the general education setting.
Got you. Good to
So
know.
it covers a broader range of disabilities.
Okay. Got
Okay.
you. Yeah.
So these are usually the two main forms of accommodations that you run into in the Department of Education. And the Department of Education covers pre-K through 12. Or I'm sorry, K through 12, excuse me. K through 12.
Yeah.
So in K through 12, you may have an IEP or a 504 if you have a disability.
Yeah. Now I did a little bit of work years ago when I was a youth pastor, and one of the things I did is college tours. And so I remember actually going and doing some college tours with some students and finding out. And so I have to follow up on this. You may know, listeners, you also may know. But I vaguely remember being told that if you have an IEP throughout your K through 12 days, that actually can be transferred over into college. I don't know all the specifics, but I had a few students who were concerned about that, and I was actually told that actually, and again, I have to follow up and make sure that I'm stating this right, but I was told that it can extend actually into college, where you can get the same accommodations transferred over. Now, and I've done some work with colleges and universities, and a lot of them now have departments of inclusion or whatever they tend to title it, and so they've tended to, if they bring in students that had IEPs, you have to go through that specific department. But I think that's also important to know, because there are some of our young adults and the disability community who are also thinking about college and need to know that those same accommodations can be made. And in actuality, when I was doing, actually now, and me doing a PhD program, I have accommodations that are made for me as facing cancer and those, because it's considered a disability. So I just thought, it's important for families to know that too.
That's a great point, actually. Yes, you're absolutely correct. The difference is you may not necessarily call it an IEP,
right,
but it is illegal to discriminate against someone because of their disability. So if you are a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in college and you need accommodations, there should be methods and departments in place to help you with those. Yeah. Now, I also know firsthand that some schools make that easier than others. But it is illegal to discriminate due to your disability. Now, the Department of Education specifically regulates that for elementary, middle, high schools. I don't know how much of that, and this is a great opportunity for our audience to help us with that.
Exactly, yeah.
If you guys are on Instagram, Facebook, let us know how much of that is regulated for college. I don't know. I'm unaware of that. Yeah. But share your experiences. If you have a college student or you are a college student, let us know. Jump in our comments. Yeah. And we'll be sure to make sure that our audience, our greater audience, knows about that too. Because those are important resources that can help us as we all want to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I don't know. And that's why I said I got to follow up. But I do know that sometimes they can take the information from the IEP and help craft something at the college level. Like you said, it's this different department. I've had to actually fill that out. I've had my doctor fill out information for me to say, I may need additional time because of the fatigue of going through cancer treatment, those types of things. And that went through, I can't remember the exact name of the department at the university where I'm studying. But yeah, it's something that I just wanted to bring up because I do want our children and young adult and parents who want their children to attend college, or maybe they have aspirations of that, and we certainly encourage that.
Definitely.
That you still should be getting accommodations.
Absolutely. So I've been in the experience as a professor myself. All you had to do was ask. Hey, I need these accommodations. Done. What? All right. I may even follow up with me in an email just so I can make sure I include those in your lesson plan moving forward. Because sometimes, you can have a conversation with someone, you walk away 5 minutes later and you forget.
Right.
All right. Right. Maybe that's just me.
No, it's not just you. Trust me.
But not so because I want to dig into your medical background. That is privileged information that you do not have to share with me, but just so I can make sure I honor your request. But I've also been in situations where I have had professors say, well, I need you to show me proof. I need medical documentation. I need this, which can sometimes be a bit intrusive.
Yeah.
So I've seen that happen in college settings. And it can be a bit unfortunate, but I have to say I've seen more professors who are willing to accommodate than not.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and again, I would encourage anyone who's in that position to find out what the title of the department that does that at your university, because usually that provides you with, additional protections, because once it officially comes from that department, then, the professors are obligated, but they also don't need to know. And that's one of the good things before we move on is when I fill out that information, the department then comes up with the plan, and then I agree, yes, this sounds reasonable and this will be helpful. And then they send that to all the professors that I'm taking classes with. So the professor doesn't need to know specifically what my disability is or even my medical information, because it's coming from that department, and the department is saying these are the things that you need to do to accommodate this particular student. And so that's the good part about it is, and I appreciate you as a professor being willing to do that. But like you said, every place is not as gracious as you, and every professor is not as gracious. So finding out the name of that department, going through them,
definitely,
and knowing that that will protect your medical information, but also give you the accommodations that you need. So I didn't mean to butt in, but I thought that was important to just.
No, I think it's important too. Yeah. And I just want you to know, I quickly did a search, and the Department of Education does cover colleges and universities. It's Its IEP is K through 12, but the 504 under the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, they have to honor a 504. Yes.
Okay.
It can affect their funding as well as their qualifications, where they have to get reaccredited as a university or a college. Yes, they do. So, but we still want you to share your experiences. And I just want to give you a little bit more information about this too. The special education population is roughly 7.3 million students. There's 7.3 million students currently in the U.S. that receive special education. That's about 15% of the public school student population.
Yeah, that's
so
a big
this isn't
number.
just small.
Yeah.
This isn't just affecting a couple of kids if the Department of Education were to go away.
Yeah.
So, and those disabilities range from learning disabilities to physical and sensory disabilities as well, and impairments.
Okay.
So special education serves a diverse population, and it really, really makes a difference when those students get those accommodations and teachers are able to have access to that information to understand. It's not just bad behavior. Unfortunately, you can sometimes find people who are uninformed just labeling everything as deviant behavior, and that's just not the case here. That's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And I've had some experience with that, not personally, but working with families in the past where children who actually had IEPs were still being suspended at high rates. I don't know if I told this story, but just quickly, I was working with an organization, and we were working with parents, and one of the mothers had mentioned when we were actually doing a panel that her son had an IEP. He was in third grade and had been suspended multiple times and eventually expelled for behavior that was actually outlined on the IEP on how to handle it and how to, accommodate him so that, it could de-escalate some of those behaviors before they even started. And so, unfortunately, I will say that it was a child of color, which that tended to be happening a lot. And so, this is an important topic, not just for families and children of color, but for all of our families that are impacted by disability, who I've actually heard from some people personally who are concerned about, what may happen because of what their understanding is of how things work. And so,
that's a great fear. I've heard several families have that conversation. I've heard individuals talk about that. What will it look like? But let's definitely make sure we explain to our listeners what the core needs of special education is.
Yeah.
So here's the things that special education is responsible for. In addition to those IEPs, those 504s, the Department of Education, where the special education is housed, they regulate access to appropriate educational opportunities, to that individualized support and inclusive environments. They also ensure advocacy for legal rights, that everyone's legal rights are being upheld. But it's also their job to ensure collaboration between educators, family, and support staff to meet the needs of unique children. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. These are vital jobs and departments that could potentially go away. And what does that look like?
Yeah. That's the question. That's the question, because a lot of parents, and again, I want to just pause and say a couple things here. I think, one, we have to acknowledge that it's a very real fear. And so we're not, listeners, trying to push fear mongering or anything like that. We're trying to, as best as we can, at least make this particular episode as apolitical as possible. Like, we're not endorsing but this is our community. This is why we started this podcast. And
absolutely,
the Bible tells us to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. And that's not just about death is about loss. And there are some people who are grieving what they anticipate to be a potential loss in services, and some very important things that they deem necessary for their children to thrive. And so I do want us to just pause and acknowledge that, regardless of who you voted for, is that these are very real fears.
Absolutely.
And I believe as we're both Christians. A lot of our listening audience, even though everybody may not be a Christian, but a lot of our listening audience is. And so I want to encourage us to just say, it is something that we want to pause and acknowledge and say that the people who are struggling with this, they have a right to feel the way that they feel. The second thing I want to say is that this is a really robust conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually think, I don't know what you think, Terisha, but I think this needs like a part 2. Like, I don't know that we're going to be able to cover it all in one episode. So I think it's too much. So I think we probably should come back, because I still want to continue to talk a little bit more about maybe give some examples and some stories of, how IEPs work, and
absolutely
even, talk maybe a little bit more about, what do those meetings look like? What should parents, or what should our listeners know about parents and caregivers who attend IEP meetings, and what typically goes on, and how are accommodations, how do we arrive at some of those accommodations? I know we said what a child should need, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
I had a parent ask me outright, is it possible? Can that happen? Can the Department of Education be shut down? And there is a real answer for that.
Yeah.
But let's answer that in part 2.
Yeah. Let's I agree. That's too much for one episode. Let's come back and talk about, hey, what might this look like if it does happen, and what does that mean for my child? What does that mean for my family? What does that mean for the disability community? So listen, we want to come back with part 2, and so if you listen to this episode, go back and share it. Click subscribe. Make sure that you're following us on Instagram and Facebook and all the places that you can find the Harley Typical Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Spotify. Make sure that you share part 1, because we are going to come back with part 2. So stay tuned.
Don't miss it.
We're going to drop part 2 of this conversation next week. Don't miss it.